The story you are about to hear is one of the darkest secrets in the history of American industry. In the hills of western Pennsylvania, on the grounds of an old cemetery, lies a plot with 7 identical headstones. Each one belongs to a young man with the same last name, Murphy, and each of them died precisely on their 21st birthday. Between 1847 and 1883, the fate of every male heir in the Murphy line was sealed. Death on the day of his 21st birthday, under mysterious circumstances so varied yet disturbingly consistent that the local authorities eventually abandoned the investigation. For decades, this secret remained locked in the state archives, access to which was strictly limited. Only recently, thanks to the discovery of family letters and the personal diary of Dr. Ezra Caldwell, a witness to these tragedies, has the truth finally come to light. This is a story far more terrifying than any supernatural explanation, because its roots lie in the brutal reality of 19th century America, when a human life was worth no more than a lump of coal. It all began in 1846, when Seamus Murphy, a young Irish immigrant, arrived in Millfield, a rapidly growing coal town. Like thousands of other Irish fleeing the Great Famine, he brought with him nothing but calloused hands and dreams of a new life. But Seamus carried something that set him apart: a letter of recommendation from a mysterious benefactor in Ireland who promised him work at the Kiston Coal and Iron Company. Millfield was a typical company town, where everything belonged to Kiston, from houses and shops to the church and the cemetery. The company controlled every aspect of its workers' lives. Thanks to his sharp mind and ability to read and write, Seamus quickly rose through the ranks, moving from the mine into the accounting office. There he discovered that he was not merely keeping payroll records, but also maintaining a full account of the workers' lives, their debts, political views, and even church attendance. It was in that office that Seamus met Margaret O'Connell, the daughter of one of the first Irish families to arrive through Kiston Settlement Program. Margaret was not only beautiful, but also intelligent. She noticed every detail and every inconsistency in the town's life, which only strengthened Seamus's growing suspicion about the true nature of their so-called good life. Their love was genuine, but their marriage was also a pragmatic choice for survival in Millfield's harsh social hierarchy. In the spring of 1847, Margaret became pregnant with their first child. Seamus, eager to build a home for his family, tried to purchase a plot of land, only to discover, to his horror, that it was possible only if he signed additional agreements binding his future children to work for Kiston and remain tied to the settlement program. Around the same time, Margaret began suffering terrible nightmares in which she saw a graveyard filled with identical headstones, marked with the names of young men she had never met but somehow recognized. It was a premonition that soon became reality. Patrick Murphy, the first son of Seamus and Margaret, grew up healthy and strong. But from the moment of his birth, he bore the mark of a fate sealed long before his parents set foot in Pennsylvania. That fate would claim not only his life, but also the lives of every male heir after him. On March 15th, 1868, his 21st birthday, Patrick, despite feeling unwell and against his mother's pleas, went to work in the mine. He had recently been promoted to shift supervisor and could not afford to miss his duty. At 2:17 p.m., a massive methane explosion erupted in the tunnel where he worked. The blast was so powerful it was heard across the entire town. When the rescue team arrived, all 11 workers were found unconscious but alive. Only Patrick Murphy was dead. His body lay at the very center of the blast, untouched by fire or rubble, as if he had simply fallen asleep. Dr. Caldwell later wrote in his diary that Patrick appeared not to have died from the explosion, but rather from the sudden cessation of vital functions at that exact moment. When the miners regained consciousness, they all told the same strange story. Just before the blast, Patrick had stopped mid-sentence, looked at his pocket watch, and smiled, saying, "Time's up." In Patrick's pocket, they found a letter written 2 weeks earlier. It contained detailed instructions for his funeral and a list of belongings to be given to his brothers. At the very end, in his careful handwriting, were the words, "The first payment is made." The debt continues with my brothers. The official Kiston investigation declared that the explosion was caused by Patrick's negligence, and the case was closed. But Dr. Caldwell's suspicions and the Murphy family's grief only deepened. 5 years later, in March 1873, it was Thomas's turn, the second son. Unlike Patrick, Thomas had a rebellious nature and sharp intellect. He spent months investigating his brother's death and uncovered a horrifying truth. The mine had been declared unsafe weeks before the explosion, and Patrick had been deliberately sent into the danger zone on his birthday. Thomas even found a letter from Josiah Bentley himself, ordering Patrick to conduct a special inspection of the gas pockets that day. When Thomas showed the letter to his father, Seamus, overcome with rage and fear, burned it, warning his son that some secrets were best left buried. But Thomas refused to back down. As his 21st birthday approached, he grew paranoid, convinced he was being watched. On the day itself, he hid in the church bell tower with his father's rifle, telling Father O'Malley, the priest, that they were coming for him. When the bell struck noon, he saw 3 men in dark coats approaching the church. Thomas raised his rifle, but in that instant it exploded in his hands, killing him instantly. The company's investigation ruled it an accident. But Father O'Malley, who witnessed it, wrote in his diary that at the moment of Thomas's death, every clock in town stopped for exactly 21 seconds. Thomas's death broke Seamus. He turned to drink and grew careless at work. Margaret, meanwhile, sank into despair. But instead of surrendering, she began her own investigation. Studying the gravestones, she discovered that at least a dozen other families in Millfield had lost sons at the age of 21 under suspicious circumstances. She realized that these deaths were not a curse, but part of a horrifying scheme. Michael, the third son, 19 at the time, discovered in the church basement a collection of documents written in a mixture of English and Latin. These were contracts dated to the 1820s, when Kiston first established operations in the region, signed by representatives of several prominent families, including Michael's own grandfather. They described a feudal system in which immigrant families were granted jobs and housing in exchange for obligations that went far beyond ordinary labor agreements. The most chilling clause was the requirement of a tithe of blood. Each family was required to provide its eldest male heir as a sacrifice on his 21st birthday to ensure the prosperity of the company and the entire community. In return, the surviving family members would receive lifelong protection and financial security. When Michael showed the documents to his parents, Seamus, horrified, tore them to shreds, shouting that they could destroy the whole family. But Margaret, who had secretly made copies, made a decision. She would no longer hide. She turned to Father O'Malley, still haunted by Thomas's death, agreed to help. Their joint investigation revealed that the church was deeply tied to Kiston, with priests serving as witnesses to these blood contracts. In the church archive, they uncovered a secret ledger listing every family and the conditions of their obligations. Michael, now resolute, decided he would not hide. Instead, he would confront Josiah Bentley publicly. In the early morning of March, just a week before his 21st birthday, Michael walked into the Kiston office carrying a copy of the contract. He demanded answers. Bentley, seeing the evidence he thought had been destroyed, panicked. He offered Michael a large sum of money and freedom for his family in exchange for silence. But Michael refused, declaring that he would expose the conspiracy. As he left, he heard one of the company's lawyers say, "Some debts cannot be forgiven. Young Murphy, some contracts cannot be broken. Your brothers learned this lesson, and you will too." The next morning, Josiah Bentley was found dead in his office. His face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror. His death set off a chain reaction. Other Kiston officials, fearing for their own lives, began to confess. They revealed that the blood contracts were not supernatural, but a brutal tool of industrial exploitation. The deaths of the young men were carefully planned murders. Patrick had been killed by a deliberately triggered explosion, and Thomas's rifle had been sabotaged with special cartridges. Dr. Caldwell also admitted his unwilling role in the conspiracy. As the only doctor in town, he had been forced to falsify death certificates and give false testimony. However, he had secretly kept his own journal, documenting the truth. His records revealed the names of the real killers, a group of hired assassins who traveled between company towns to stage accidents. Michael Murphy lived to see his 22nd birthday, becoming the first man in his family to break the deadly cycle. But survival came at a cost. The Murphy family was threatened. Their home was vandalized, and Seamus was beaten. Facing constant persecution, the family decided to leave Pennsylvania. In the summer of 1874, they fled to Oregon, where Seamus found work at a sawmill. Michael married and had a son, whom he named Patrick in honor of his fallen brother. He hoped the nightmare was behind them. But when young Patrick turned 16, he began investigating his family's history, and his inquiries led to new discoveries. The blood contracts were part of a broader system of exploitation that stretched across the entire East Coast. In the spring of 1887, just months before his 21st birthday, Patrick Jr. began noticing the same signs his uncles had: suspicious strangers in town and unexplained incidents. But this time, the family was prepared. On March 15, 1887, exactly 20 years after Patrick Sr.'s death, Patrick Jr. celebrated his 21st birthday in the town square, surrounded by more than 50 armed supporters. When 3 hired killers appeared, they were met not by a lone victim, but by an entire crowd of enraged miners and lumbermen. The assassins were captured alive, and their confessions led to arrests and investigations that exposed similar operations in 12 states. This resulted in the liberation of hundreds of families trapped in bondage and the passing of new laws banning such exploitation. Patrick Murphy Jr. lived to an old age. The name Murphy, once synonymous with tragedy, became a symbol of courage and resistance against industrial oppression. 7 graves in the Pennsylvania cemetery remain as a reminder that even the most entrenched systems of exploitation can be overcome when ordinary people refuse to stay silent. The town of Millfield did not survive the scandal. The Kiston Coal and Iron Company went bankrupt, and the town slowly emptied. Today, only a few abandoned foundations remain to mark the place where so much suffering occurred. But the story of the Murphy family lives on, teaching us that the most terrifying nightmares are often not supernatural, but born of human greed and fear. The 7 Murphy sons did not die because of a curse, but because powerful men decided their lives were an acceptable price for economic prosperity. Their story is not only one of tragedy, but also a testimony to the strength of spirit that can defeat the evil lurking in the darkest corners of our history.